All right, take it away, Amanda.
Okay, I am Amanda. I'm an LPC and supervisor on the Align team. Andrea certified and consultant in training. I mainly work with adults, teens. 16 is usually the lowest I go, so older teens. And absolutely love working with relationship issues, complex trauma, really the attachment stuff, finding those attachment wounds and helping them through that. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about codependency and how it shows up in the room. And I think a lot of the questions that you guys asked hopefully are sprinkled in here. And hopefully I'll be able to like tie these all in. So yeah, I put in a lot into this PowerPoint, so hopefully it's not too much. Okay. It will let me share, right?
I think so. If it doesn't, let me know.
Let's see here. All right. How do I get it to where this is like back in like school? Normally, can we see the slides all the
Mm,
time? We'll just do that. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Okay. So yeah. So when your client asks, "Am I codependent?" I don't know if you guys have had clients ask that, but I think there's a lot of like language online, and so sometimes they get curious, like, "Is this what's happening with me?" So we're gonna go over what is codependency, the definition of it, signs that it shows up in the therapy room. Is it a myth? How does it develop? And I think that's important before understanding like how to treat it, and then some helpful resources that you guys may already have, or if not, you can implement them with clients and with your work with them. So, okay, have you guys heard of the book Codependent No More by Melody? I don't know how to say her last name. So she's like known as like the queen of codependency with that book. So I really like the way that she describes it. It's a concept of like losing oneself in the name of helping another person. And she also states people who love others more than they love themselves to their detriment and the other person's detriment. So I think that's that part, like to their and the other person's detriment, is what's really important. This is also like feeling more responsible for others than themselves. And she also mentions like the lack of relationship with ourself, and that's like permeating everything we do. She mentioned this, and I put in here like pin this for later because it's going to come back in another slide. Someone asked her, it was a podcast, like who ends up having codependency, and she says most people that she sees codependency issues with, not all, but she sees often lived with alcoholism as a child in the household. So I pinned this because it's going to come back. Okay, so how does it show up in the therapy room? I think what's important to remember is these things are going to show up pretty chronically, or it's going to be causing some disorder in their life. So I don't want you to take these things and think like, oh man, I'm sure you guys wouldn't. But some clients actually think that about themselves. They're like, oh, I'm codependent because I've felt this way before. So they might say things like, I just love too deeply, very intensely with people. I always put others first, might be something they say, especially if you're trying to get them to recognize like putting themselves in a situation. I'm not okay unless they're okay. They might not say that, but you'll notice they'll be dysregulated at the thought of someone else not being okay. And I had a client say this to me when I presented them the idea of saying no or not helping that other person. And their language was, that feels like life or death. And so what's really important is to like kind of gain that knowledge of their internal experience of what's happening when they're thinking of not helping that person. Why does that feel like I'm dying? Why does that feel like death to me? So it might look like suppressing their own needs for harmony. The fear of being alone overrides mistreatment. People pleasing, it can look like that at the expense of self, but again, it's going to be pretty chronic. Identity is fused with the role of a caregiver. When I say that, do you guys think of already some clients that are like, yeah, I can think of some. Yeah. Okay. So is it a myth? These are the writers of the book Attached. I want to say it's, yeah, Attached. I like to play devil's advocate with things and always find a balance. I think I'm a DBT to my nature person. So they advise caution around pathologizing codependency. Why? Because we're inherently programmed for connection. So Carly, you mentioned that. You're like, yeah, I understand that piece. So I think what's really important is to hold that it's in our nature to connect, but is this causing like distress and disorder in their life? Then it might be maladaptive. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Like if codependency is a myth or not?
Yeah, I feel like when I read that in Attached, I was like, whoa, and felt like this extreme either or, like either it's a real thing or it's not. And I think seeing it as a spectrum is helpful, that like some things that are natural in an extreme place could be unhealthy. And so what I hear in codependency is like I'm so connected to someone else that I'm like enmeshed with who they are. And like the connection is based upon this other person being okay and my ability to control like or change their okayness. So I don't know that I would agree that it's not a myth, but I think folks who are anxiously attached can pathologize their need for connection. I'm too needy, I'm too needy because everyone's always telling them they're too needy, when part of healing anxious attachment is actually coming home to it's healthy to
Yep.
need others. So that's kind of where I land with it. I'm curious
Yeah.
what others have to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because a lot of times with anxious attachment clients, they're actually trying to get rid of this part of themselves, especially if they're pairing with someone that's avoidant. They're trying to get rid of it. So yeah, I like a balanced view. Like it can be maladaptive, but there's a reason behind all of it, why they're doing these things. Way early on in understanding self-harm, that was like a big aha like moment to me, was like, oh, like what's the function of that? So as a baby intern, I kind of took that with pretty much everything that's considered maladaptive and a disorder, is like, what's the function behind that? What are they trying to achieve? So I made a few slides with like, how does it develop? And these are like theories that are out there. So codependency, the neurobiology of anxious attachment. So I threw this in here. This has been something that we've been talking a lot about on our team at Aligned, is the brain's goal is to get to safety, homeostasis, and connection. So with anxious attachment, what they're experiencing at an early age is intermittent reinforcement of love, affection, emotional attunement, maybe even safety. So what this does is it creates the dysregulated attachment system. The amygdala is on high alert, and they're subconsciously, it's waiting for, am I going to get this connection or not again? And so, Elaine, you mentioned like, how do we get them to recognize these like body sensations and what's happening for them, and get out of the logic behind it? Well, interestingly enough, they have lower access to their prefrontal regulation. And so that's why they can't think rationally. They can't think, oh, this is not okay that I'm doing this to myself. This is hurting me or hurting the other person. They don't have access to that information as much. This also creates a dopamine and, I always butcher this, oxytocin, seeking loop. So they're going to be chasing for that connection in any way that they can get it. So even if that means at the detriment to themselves. Okay. Any questions with that so far? Cool. You guys know this stuff. You're like, yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. So this is pretty cool. I read that codependency might also share roots with pathological altruism. So when helping others causes harm, and the way that this was also described is this is basically the opposite to a sociopath, not caring at all. It's like the complete opposite spectrum where they're caring a lot. So it also explains like generosity in the brain. Generosity activates the reward system, which is associated with pleasure, social bonding, and valuation. So this is where we're noticing like self-worth is tied to being needed. Those are connected. And then with oxytocin, the bonding hormone is released during connection, empathy, and caregiving. So this is intensifying in them the drive to care for others, even if it's harmful. So it's all connected. There's reasons behind it, why the brain's doing what it's doing. Then, what I often find with clients is codependency is more so rooted in the inability to tolerate perceived or real negative affect in others. So with your clients, a way to help that in the room, sometimes I don't really focus on like how can we direct the self-care, like how can we direct this to taking care of you. I ask the question, when you think about not helping this person, what comes up for you? And that's I feel like I'm dying. And usually, since we're all EMDR in here, I have them hold that body sensation. And I say, I want you to scan back as far as you can go. When's the first time that you felt that way? Boom. They have a memory of their mom going through a divorce or something like that. And they're like, that's where it was. Mom was dysregulated all the time. So then it's in the next one, I'm going to explain it a little bit more. So yeah, so this goes on to talk about like the anterior insula, amygdala, and mirror neuron system are all responsible for the empathetic attunement. So empathetic distress happens, and then there's a rush to fix, soothe, and rescue the other person and regulate their own internal distress. So when we're seeing the dynamic in childhood of the parent couldn't regulate their emotions, it gets flopped and they start to try to regulate the parent in order to find a sense of safety in themselves. And so with the slides before that, all of those things are connected. They find a sense of value in helping that other person. Is this all making sense? Is it connecting? I hope. Okay,
Yeah. Can you say that last part that you said again? Because that was so good about parents and attunement.
yes. Okay, so it's right here actually. So codependency and co-regulation, I think, are really intertwined. There's no research behind this, but this is just my own brain. So when co-regulation didn't happen or it was distorted, this is when the parents are supposed to be attuning and soothing the child. That creates safety, belonging, and eventually self-soothing in themselves. So this is going back to what we need biology, right? Biologically is safety, homeostasis, and connection. So when that's not happening, even at like an infant age, the dysregulated parent, then it flops. The child will find creative ways to become the regulator instead. Oh, you're not going to soothe me, so I'm going to figure out a way to get that sense of safety. So then their identity and self-worth becomes tied to other people's states. So Carly, I don't know if I repeated it, but it's tied with that flopping where it's reversed. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I think
Whatever I
that's
said,
interesting.
it's gone and into the abyss.
It was
But
great.
it's being recorded. Okay. Okay, so this is a thing that I pinned earlier when Melody mentioned that she sees this coming up with parents or alcoholism addiction in the home. So with me looking into like the importance of co-regulation, typically the lack of co-regulation leads to lack of self-soothing, leads to seeking external soothing. If they can't regulate themselves, they're going to find a way to do that somewhere else. So that might be substances, food, sex, new relationships. This is where you might see love addiction. So, pin, ding. That means that they grew up with a parent who also didn't possibly receive co-regulation. So, I think it's a lot about co-regulation and being able to soothe the child at a young age. It's really just a maladaptive way to find safety in themselves, is I feel safe when I'm helping other people. So how to treat it would be, first, psychoeducation, having them understand the function of these patterns, and really, Lindsay, laying on the self-compassion, because I think there's a lot of stuff that I don't know about you guys, a lot of stuff that I've read, listened to about codependency, and they're just like laying it on them. Say no, stop doing this, stop doing that. And it's like, well, you can't just like change those patterns like that. You can't just, I mean, I guess you can, but if you don't have the regulation there, it's going to feel like life or death that you're telling them to stop doing what has brought them a sense of safety and belonging. So then what do? Help them obtain safety, homeostasis, and connection. Really bring into the room what's happening in their body, what's happening inside when they think about changing these dynamics, and then rewire those networks. Whether it's rewiring because you're choosing like self-soothing and you're choosing a different pattern. But I really do believe that doing some type of like attachment-focused EMDR can really help. Because I can always identify with those clients when it's not really, you're not pinpointing the urge to help them. You're going to be pinpointing the memory of when that dysregulation happened in response to seeing the other person dysregulated. I hope I'm making sense there. The urge to help others is just a way to soothe that. Okay. And then I think modalities that are really helpful is DBT, somatic skills to help soothing. EMDR parts work is really, really helpful. I think it's helpful because sometimes this is like a part of them that's functioning for a reason, that was fragmented, and now that is there for survival. And then attachment focused approaches. EFT can be helpful, but I'm always going to encourage, like, I'm a EMDR to my core, finding the root of it. So yeah. And then those are some resources. So yeah, so to go back to your guys' questions, first, is there any questions until I get to those?
I did just have, I guess, kind of a comment slash question in a way. I love what you were sharing about the attunement pieces and the early relationships and things like that. And so I was thinking about this as like with trauma, like being either things that did happen that shouldn't have, or maybe things that were needed that didn't happen. So more like the absence of things that happen that can feel traumatic for folks and be traumatic. I don't know. I was kind of wondering, like, because this kind of seems like maybe it's more in that kind of flavor of maybe some things that just like were missing or weren't happening when they were needed or really important developmentally. And so I wonder, do you feel like folks who are coming in presenting this way, do they tend to look back at their story like everything was fine, or like they don't have a lot of like significant things? Like how do they tend to look back on the experiences, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, thinking of some of my clients, sometimes it's different, yeah, because it's so normal to them. It's so normal, and it's so until a certain point, but it typically it functions. If I keep taking care of so and so, then everything's good. I feel regulated. So sometimes they can't identify it. So usually you can unravel it when you identify like what's coming up for them when they change those patterns. That doesn't feel safe. Why does that not feel safe? And sometimes it's a slow process, because I think anytime you identify something that's unhelpful, like you're exposing like the thing that they built so hard to feel safe in the world. So you just want to like dip your toe in it. But there's been times where maybe moving too fast in sessions and they're like, whoa, like you're exposing all of the things. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Sometimes they do understand that it's not helpful, and sometimes they think it's completely normal.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, because I was just picturing somebody maybe like kind of over functioning in a lot of their relationships and doing things and almost kind of having like, oh no, it's fine, because like they've kept it together and it's felt fine, And then when you start to, I love what you said about shifting from like, okay, well, what comes up for you if you imagine like not doing that and then like kind of using that as your entry point. I thought that was really awesome.
Yeah. And yeah, sometimes they are coming in the door and they're not understanding why am I doing this to myself? Like, why do I keep going back? Or, and that's when like the to their own detriment is showing up. Diana, you had a question?
Well, I don't know if this is, I don't know if this is really a good question, but I was just thinking like, what's the line that really creates a clear difference? And maybe there really isn't, between like anxious attachment style and codependency. I mean, is it when they're doing things to the detriment of themselves? Because also people who are anxiously attached, like they'll do that, like, and we'll categorize it as people pleasing, or, everything else, everything is okay. Like nothing is, I'm not letting any of the balls drop, even though it's getting heavy. It's Is there a line that draws like the separation, or do they kind of bleed into one another?
I think they're totally related. But yeah, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I can see like there's certain disorders that the way that they show up, I'm like, oh, this is just this attachment to its extreme level. It's now like just creating disorder in their life. So really, I think with codependent, and I don't even like to say that, I like to, because I teach my clients who have codependent patterns, because I want to get them away from that language of like, I am anxious, I am codependent. The goal is to get them to build a secure relationship with themselves and have that anxious attachment be to its most like functional, because we can always build secure relationships in new relationships, right? And a secure one with ourselves. Lindsay, you had a hand up?
No, I was just clapping to what you said.
Oh yeah, yeah. But yeah, like to say like there's no line. I mean, and I think that's like how I view a lot of disorders, especially like personality ones. It's I don't view it like they have this thing like they have COVID. It's not something we could test for. That'd be so great, like to be able to test and be like, this is the disorder you have. But it's just like a cluster of patterns and how it's showing up. I have some clients who thought that they had BPD. I think that's pretty common now on TikTok and other sites, that language. I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, you also have disorganized attachment style. And it's just showing up in a very extreme way. And then some clients question if they have narcissistic personality disorder. Well, you have an avoidant attachment style. So yeah, sometimes I really question, like, is this just disorders of attachment? Okay, so yeah, conceptualizing like how it presents. I like to find those like rooted memories, doing a lot of like inner child work to rebuild that relationship and have them meet their needs as the parent, the adult self now. and practical things you could do with clients to get them to a secure place. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys, I put in here The Power of Showing Up by Dan Siegel. I love Dan Siegel's work. He musters it up to like those four S's: safe, seen, soothed, and secure. So if they're safe in a relationship emotionally and physically, if they're being soothed emotionally as well, are they being seen? Do they feel like they're understood and being seen as like a separate person away from the parent? I think it goes kind of hand in hand with like heard, seen and heard. And then secure, the last S is like, is this happening consistently? So working with the client with anxious attachment is really the goal of like getting them to show up for themselves consistently. So when they notice, oh, okay, I did something that was against my self-respect, you notice it, create self-compassion around it, and then you keep building that secure relationship with them. But it sometimes it takes a while. Any other questions?
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about, and even for folks who will be listening to the recording, who may be a little bit newer to EMDR, um, what is different about attachment-focused EMDR versus just standard protocol? Can you kind of illuminate how that looks different as a therapist?
Yeah, it's you're still doing standard protocol, but you're really approaching it with being mindful of like what adaptive networks are there as far as like attachment wise. So Laurel Parnell, attachment focused EMDR, her book is really great. She describes like complex cases with CPTSD and early attachment wounds, and she also is heavy on like building resources, RDIs with them. So something I do with clients more often than not is building a nurturer, a protector, and a wise figure. Sometimes depending on like how complicated it is. So like if you have a client like, hey, can you think of a time that you were nurturing like to someone else or when someone else was nurturing to you? Sometimes you have to create like a whole new character. Like I had there was someone from a TV show, I can't remember, something along the lines of like Mrs. Doubtfire, where that was like their nurturing figure. So you have to be creative with it, trying to find those resources. But yeah, as far as protocol, it's pretty much the same thing. You're just being more mindful of that and looking at it like, is this person safe in attachment? Like, is it safe to go there? Because sometimes you see those stuck points where, yeah, early on in my EMDR days, we were doing targets, and I'm like, oh, da, 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 and oh, there's a block there. Why is the block there? Because mom never wanted me. And I'm like, oh, we have to go all the way back. We have to go back to processing an unwanted birth because those blocking beliefs existed that I'm not worthy of like love and those things. So if I'm not worthy of love, then I'm not worthy of healing this memory or feeling better. I don't know if that answered your question, really. Hopefully it did.
Yeah, totally. That's super helpful.
What would you guys say are like the most difficult things that show up in the room? Like the most challenging things with codependency in relationships?
I think for me and the clients that come to mind when you're sharing is like the idea that like I cannot be okay if this person isn't okay. And how like I feel like a lot of the people that I work with are like highly intellectualizing and they're like, oh, sorry, I had to stop because I was getting out of breath. Um, so they tend to be like black or white thinkers. And so I think a lot of the time it's like when we're trying to go in and speak about codependency, they think that the opposite of that or like what healing looks like is like total independence. And so like a lot of psychoed teaching them that like, no, it's actually interdependence that we're going for. And like, what does a healthy relationship look like? And yeah, I mean, you made a great point about like, how does it feel to sit with the feeling of like not caring for this person or like not, saying no or letting them have their stuff. Um, so that just came up for me is like a lot of like, no, we're not trying to like totally get you like away and like independent. It's more of that like interdependence. Like, how do we, build a healthy relationship, like show vulnerability, embrace that in both partners or, parent-child relationship, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be very black and white where it's like, oh, like it can't be this way, so I'm just going to completely shut it down. And that's why I think using that parts work language and the function language is really important because they can understand that, oh, this part of me is not bad or this function is not bad. I'm just trying to feel like safe and connected with my partner. And so disconnecting completely and being independent is not the goal.
Yeah.
It's
I
like
just
a
feel like people
feels
will
like a
think
temp.
that,
Right.
people will think that like, okay, well, I have to completely detach from this person in order to be in relationship with them. And it's like, that's not the goal. So,
Yep. Yeah, we're building tolerance around like that emotion. Yeah, because that's just a way to avoid the emotion.
right. Hmm.
Was thinking a little bit about what you said, like from the jump today about it's not only like I think hurtful for them, but for others, something along those lines. And I think that that's actually probably a pretty challenging one. I think about is like when folks come in and they're like, um, I don't know why, like I do all these things for other people and like, but they feel like it's not reciprocated or they feel like people shy away or kind of like move out of their life. Like they're like doing so much and then it's like super painful because the way that it's received, like other people either aren't wanting that or kind of set boundaries because of like whatever they're needing. And so I think that's kind of an interesting one to have to navigate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I probably have a harder time with that one because it's like then you have to really get them with the perspective of like you're overstepping their boundaries kind of thing. And I see that a lot with the parents. They're like overstepping in the kids' boundaries.
Lindsay, that makes me think of there's someone, therapist, influencer, that was kind of making a correlation between narcissism and people pleasing and saying that both of them are trying to control other people, but through different avenues. A narcissist maybe through like manipulation, and a people pleaser through like needing shape shifting to be what the other person expects, but neither of those feel like authentic connection. And both actually are coming from a vulnerable place, which is interesting to think about. When I think about what's hard in codependency and particularly like how that shows up in people pleasing is when someone sets a boundary, like in therapy, they can feel really clear about like, this is where my boundary is, this is like my limit. But the hardest part about it is the other person's reaction to their boundary, almost as if like that person's upset feeling is now my job to fix. And their upset is too big, it's too dysregulating. And so, from an EMDR lens, like that might be the target of can I sit with someone else not being happy with me? And if you think about it, if a requirement of relationship is that people are always happy with me, that doesn't leave a lot of room for the other person to be human. But yeah, we can see where it starts in like a place of pain, almost this thinking like, I'm not okay, but if I can make you okay, then maybe you'll be available to then meet my need and make me okay. So it's actually like this brilliant strategy that we come up with when we're really young that then the end of that cycle never happens where like you take care of me. And so sometimes with clients, I like to even name like that's a brilliant strategy and kind of like I love that you have that. And like, can we feel now how it feels? But I think the boundary piece, and particularly when people feel guilty for boundary, that's where it becomes tricky. So I'm curious your thoughts, Amanda, on how you handle that with folks when they want to set the boundary. It feels like so confident in session, but then thinking about actually having that conversation, like the brakes just kind of come to a screech.
Yeah. It all has to do with being able to tolerate the negative affect in the other person. Yep. And I love that you use that language because I do the same thing. Like, that, this is a very smart tactic. Like you found a way to get your need met. And I'm so glad that you did. So that way because you really can like somewhat create like a sense of shame around it if you continue to talk about how it's unhelpful without like sprinkling in that compassion in there. But yeah, someone once told me that the root of NPD is worthlessness. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Like it's a way that that's showing up and they're trying to not feel worthless. I think a lot of people are scared of personality disorders, but they're a lot of fun once you understand them.
Especially when you can like understand the pain behind it. Yeah. So I'm going to throw you a question that probably is not easy to answer in just a few minutes, but how do you define what is too needy? If you have a client coming in and maybe they have anxious attachment, so they have kind of this history of being seen as too needy, where do you draw the line on what is codependent versus what is a healthy need, especially when the person they're partnered with maybe has a different idea of that? How do you help?
Yeah, I think I go back to like what's our goal is to be able to have a secure relationship with ourselves and others. So the goal is to be able to be okay being alone, being okay with others. So if one or the other is like not secure in that, then identifying that, like, okay, what's happening there? But as far as like too needy, that's a tough one. I use a lot of DBT skills of like what is helpful or unhelpful. So if we can identify like maybe something they're doing, like an expectation to always being on their phone, like have to text back right away, and help them identify like is that helpful or unhelpful, or mindfulness, using those skills, how the other person might feel. But it's tough because with anxious attachment, sometimes that network is built of I'm too needy, when in actuality, they're just with someone that's avoidant and they're trying to suppress that. So yeah, I think too needy is going to be too needy for someone who does not have the capacity to give it. And if someone doesn't have the capacity to give it and they still have a secure attachment and they're still working towards building a secure attachment, then I might be like, okay, let's look at that. Why don't they have the capacity? Is it because it's unhelpful what you're asking from them? Is that unrealistic? So it's really working with them to identify like, is it realistic or not? And that's tough because you're working with another person on the other side sometimes. So the limit does not exist is the answer from Mean Girls. That's hard to answer. Mine too needy, mine too much is different than another person's.
Yeah, sometimes what comes to mind, and I think it's Dan Siegel's work, where he describes like rigidity versus chaos, and both of those are on either extreme of unhealth. And so there's this idea of flexibility in the middle. And so sometimes I get curious about like if we're validating the need underneath needing a text back, 3 times or whatever it is, how that's coming out. Is that rigid? It must be met in this way. Maybe the need underneath that to know that my partner's thinking about me through the day. If that's valid, is there another way that could be met? And noticing like the client's rigidity or flexibility, but also their partner's rigidity or flexibility in that. Yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, totally. And then also like keeping in mind the rigidity of trying to get all needs from one person versus like spreading that out.
Yeah.
Not everyone, not one person can be everything to you, and you can't be everything to them. Which once you say that, where do you feel them? What do you mean I'm
Well,
not everything to them?
which makes sense. Like if the wound is an attachment wound from a parent to a parent is your whole world, and you should have all your needs met relationally there. I mean, kids have friends too, but especially in those younger years, you are absolutely solely dependent on parents. So it makes sense when we can understand like where the root of that is. But yeah, to be able to see as an adult, no, your needs can be met through a broad range is
Yep.
valuable. Well, I want to
Same.
make sure we have time for folks to transition into whatever is next. So, Amanda, where can folks find you if they want
Yeah.
to refer a client to you? Are you accepting new clients, or if they're going through EMDR certification? Where can people
Yeah.
get?
Yeah, I'm taking consultants. I'm a consultant in training. So if you want to improve your skills or even work towards certification, there's my info there, my email, business line. And then, yeah, I'm accepting new clients, telehealth.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, we'll look forward to next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.